Hello and welcome to the Mobalytics patch 11.13 High-ELO tier list. Just to remind you, we have recently updated our tier list on our site, including the introduction of an extra tier. If you're wondering where a champ is and don't see them on our list, then head on over to mobalytics.gg and scroll down to the bottom of the tier list and you'll see a full list including champs in C and D tier. Now let's get stuck into things. In the top lane, in the God tier we have Nocturne, Fiora and Riven, and the S tier we have Akali, Camille, Gwen, Irelia, Lulu, Sett and Wukong. The big changes we've seen in top lane were on items. We saw Hullbreaker and Anathema's Chains introduced. The former has made pretty big waves with a lot of split push champions like Fiora, Camille and Jax able to build it to increase their dueling power and tower taking ability. Anathema's on the other hand has been a lot more niche in usage and for the most part overlooked other than in specific scenarios. It's a lot more dependent on the enemy team. We also saw the Stridebreaker change. For some champions like Darius and Garen, it was a big hit losing that extra mobility, but for champions who are already capable of getting into melee range, it helps with their stickiness, and the extra 200 HP makes it a really powerful ball of stats. In terms of individual champions, we saw Riven tone down slightly, but still overperforming massively in the right hands. Lee Sin also felt the pain from the nerf to his E. It being buffed was a big factor in him showing up in solo lanes due to being able to easily contest priority and dual melees well. Moving on to our highlight champs, first up is Nocturne, and he has benefited massively from the changes to Stridebreaker. Losing the dash isn't as big an issue when you have your ultimate to get you into range of your target. The increased slow, better stat line and higher damage makes it so you're able to keep targets in range of you easily after ulting to land your fear, and the increased HP makes you a really solid duelist. Nocturne's laning is really solid as his wave clear is very effective to find priority, and this gives him the window to move around and join in with skirmishes on the map. Next up is Sett, and things were a bit tentative with the changes to Stridebreaker. The extra dash was great for getting Sett into range to set up his engages. However, the new Stridebreaker received such a massive boost in so many areas, he's still performing really well. Sett is great in the laning phase and can go toe to toe in most matchups thanks to the trading power of his passive, his Q, and his W giving them that massive shield and able to turn damage around in return. Once he gets to teamfights though, he's an absolute monster, capable of taking out high priority targets and landing heavy CC chains with tons of damage. Comboing the new Stridebreaker with his engage allows him to layer some extra damage, slow them down, and keep layering punches into them. Next up is Camille. Camille's flourishing thanks to a lot of her trickier matchups. Renekton as an example being nerfed, and with Divine Sunder she spikes incredibly hard on one item. The Sheen passive syncs with her Q and allows her to deal a ton of true damage. Couple that with a large amount of HP she gets and she's ready to fight sooner than she has been, and of course scales incredibly well. In the side lane she's a monster at taking towers, and thanks to the true damage on her Q, she can handle any opponents building Anathema's Chains or Hullbreaker. On top of that, the extra HP early means she's more capable than ever of joining team fights, and if you're able to get on the backline with your ultimate, you can easily decimate a high priority target. Moving on to the jungle, in the God tier we have Xin Zhao, and the S tier we have Fiddlesticks, Karthus, Kindred, Nocturne and Shaco. A fair bit of shifting when it comes to the jungle. A big change was the nerf to Rumble's W cooldown. Rumble was relying on a 6-second cooldown to spam it so he could overheat before he does his first camp, and that allowed him to clear his buffs really quickly as his first camp. With this change now, he's a lot slower to start and he is more leash reliant. He's still able to find a lot of momentum after he's level 3 and is a monster in skirmishes or teamfights though. Kindred has moved up to S tier. She received a buff to her Q cooldown a while back and she's been steadily rising in priority over time. And finally, Trundle is a champion who's been doing better and better. He's good into melee skirmishes as he can chomp on them and drain the AD. His pillar is a really powerful tool for keeping enemies in range and stopping ranged champions from getting away. Trundle has always been a strong duelist into AD champs early, and that remains to be true. And on to our highlight champions. First up is Karthus. Karthus is a champion who's very item dependent and very based around the gold he can generate. With a reduction to the cost of mage mythics, he's able to hit his spikes sooner and start outputting massive ults to decimate the enemy team. Karthus is able to farm quickly and he's actually pretty solid in skirmishes if you're able to land your Qs. A new strategy people have been running is taking exhaust. It's really effective if you end up in early fights and you're dealing with a lot of melee threats. That being said, it does depend on the enemy composition. If the enemy team has champions like Leona who will catch you out with her ultimate, then Flash is definitely warranted to avoid being picked. Onto Diana, and she's really powerful right now and a staple in pro play. Ideally you want to be farming to 6 so you can get access to your ultimate. At that point you're really solid in teamfights and skirmishes and capable of doing a huge amount of AoE damage. The best scenario for you is to have a CC support on your team who can easily lock people in place for your ultimate to deal a ton of damage. You're also pretty fast at taking neutral objectives thanks to your passive, and so can easily solo a dragon or herald early. Jin Zhao is a monster at the moment, really popular in pro play and very dominant in solo queue. His skirmishing power is hard to match early, and thanks to the long range engage on his E, he can get on top of his targets and is hard to escape. Jin Zhao syncs really well with enchanters and solo lanes. Karma and Lulu both help find priority, make him very hard to kill, and can keep him fighting for longer, so are great options if you're planning to duo with a friend. In the later game stages, Jin Zhao actually holds up well. Thanks to his ult, he can zone control and soak a ton of damage, allowing his team to front to back effectively while creating so much space. Onto mid lane, in the God tier we have Nocturne and Akali, and in the S tier we have Annie, Echo, Galio, Castin, Katarina, Lee Sin, Lulu, Malzahar, Kiana, Rumble, Silas, Yone, and Zed. Quite a mouthful. Mid received quite a lot of shift ups. A lot were down to the cheaper mage mythics giving quicker spikes to a range of champions. Some are a bit more specific however. LeBlanc has risen in priority thanks to a good lane matchup into Akali. She can zone her from the waves and harass her while being able to use her chains to have vision of Akali in her shroud. Galio is also enjoying more mages in the mid lane, as his role as an anti-mage thanks to his magic damage shield is becoming more valued. Lucian has been rising in priority. People are rushing Serelda's Grudge second after Gale Force and allows you to essentially 100 to 0 people with your culling as it slows them. It's a really powerful combo that helps you function as an assassin while still having solid later game scaling. Lulu is a great solo laner at handling a lot of the popular meta champions. Melee skirmishers struggle against Lulu thanks to a polymorph, which is a great shutdown ability. When facing mobile assassins like Akali, this is a great tool to prevent her annihilating your team. In the lane phase, she's pretty capable of bullying out her opponents and easily able to find priority, which allows her to move and assist her jungle. Particularly with champions like Xin Zhao, she can buff them up and perform really effectively in 2v2 mid-jungle skirmishes and move to apply that pressure to side lanes as well. Castin has been performing really well on higher elos. The reduction in the cost of Everfrost allows him to complete his items sooner and hit his spikes. As much as Castin's early levels are underwhelming, he only really needs one fight win to be in a position to complete his mythic and start taking over the game. His damage output is insane, and his high mobility allows him to deal with the stronger skirmishes in the meta and find windows to blow targets up. Akali is monstrous in pro play and similarly in high elo solo queue. She's hard to play with a high burden of execution, but unstoppable when piloted well. Her E does insane damage, so often connecting it on a squishy target is guaranteed death for them. She's capable of one-shotting entire backlines with a second ultimate, and her high mobility and shroud make her very hard to deal with. In skirmishes, she's able to take out a target quickly, and as a hard to pin down target, she can survive for long enough to continue her rotation multiple times in a sustained fight. The AD carries. The God tier is empty at the moment, and in the S tier we have Draven, Ezreal, Kog'Maw, Vayne, and Ziggs. Overall, AD carry hasn't seen too many changes. There has been some shifts. The Felios on the back of some more buffs is actually finding a place in the meta and performing well. We also saw Jinx dropping down a tier. She's not been as solid as the late game carry since her nerfs, and a lot of the stronger laning AD carries like Draven and Kalista are giving her a hard time at getting there. Onto our highlight picks, and the first up is Draven. The Axe buffs last patch actually did a lot for Draven. It was a small increase, but because you're tossing them out so frequently, there's a lot of value over the course of a laning phase or a game. You can destroy enemy bot lanes early and snowball incredibly hard, not just with your passive, but his scaling with bonus attack damage. Often you'll be able to challenge from level 2, and with an aggressive support can find all-ins or kills early on. Another big factor in his strength is that in this skirmish heavy meta, he's able to join them and have an impact earlier than a lot of AD carries typically do. We highlighted Ziggs last time, but we actually figured it was worth bringing him up again because he's due a nerf next patch and is doing so well currently. The cheaper mythic was a big factor, but the quality of life change for his ult and the increased damage in his Q has allowed him to really fly up in terms of effectiveness. He's able to find priority in lanes early, and once he has his mythic, he can just annihilate waves for permanent priority. This allows him to remain pretty safe when your support is roaming to find an impact. When it comes to later scenarios, he can fit well in a poke composition or with dive comps, as throwing down your ultimate on top of your frontline divers can help them find the damage to kill high priority targets. When playing Ziggs, your W is your biggest tool against the high impact melee skirmishes we're seeing so much of. If you manage to knock them away and yourself back as well, you create a large amount of space. Kalista has flown up in strength recently. Her power in lane is almost unmatched, and she's able to start applying pressure as early as level 1. Definitely a difficult champion to play effectively, but this is a high-low tier list after all. She's really good at setting up dives with a high burst damage and the ability to reset aggro with her ultimate. She's also solid in early skirmishes, so after you find an advantage in lane, you can move to help contest things like Scuttle Crab, Dragon, and Herald, and should come out ahead. You also have solid objective control, as you can help secure them with your Rend. For the supports, in the God tier we have Bard, Lulu, and Thresh, and in the S tier we have Senna and Zilean. Support really hasn't changed massively. We did see the impact from the Moonstone buffs having a tiny effect on some enchanters. Sona and Yuumi are two examples who are performing a bit better as it's starting to be reflected in terms of win rate. Let's get straight stuck into the highlighted champions. Zilean is really strong in solo queue. In a messy environment, a free ult revive has a ton of value. Guardian helps you survive most lanes, but you can take Aerie into range supports for the extra harass. Chevaliers is really good for him as you can provide extra mobility to your teammates on top of what your E already offers. You can also find priority in lane pretty easily with your bombs, and if you manage to connect a double bomb in skirmishes or teamfights, you can have a massive impact. Zilean does well when your team is ahead. Having a fed team member who you can speed up and revive is a lot better than simply trying to keep your 0-5 AD carry alive. Nautilus has been pretty meta for a while, but recently things have switched up slightly with players building Zhonya's, sometimes as early as first item. The stopwatch active is really powerful for heavy engage supports. Being able to dive or engage into the enemy team and buy time with stasis is a great tool, but the limiting factor was that you can only use it once per game. By buying a Zhonya's, you can essentially have it available for every team fight. The stats on it are solid, armor is a no-brainer, but Nautilus has good AP ratios which allows your ult and Q to do a fair amount more damage. Typically, if you're rushing Zhonya's, you should grab Kindle Gem and Boots first as a minimum. Taric individually isn't actually particularly strong, but because of Kallista's rising priority, he's actually enabled quite heavily by her and becomes a strong option. You can use Kallista's dashes to set up a stun from level 2, and with your ultimate you can throw Taric in and allow him to get into melee range, which is typically something he struggles to do. Taric's ultimate is also reliant on engage to keep enemies in range, as usually they'll look to disengage, and Kallista can help with that with their chase potential and ultimate. If you're looking to duo with your friend who's an AD carry player and he's an accomplished Kallista main, then Taric is definitely a solid option for your 2v2. And that's it for this patch. Hopefully this has been helpful in getting you up to speed on the meta. If you're interested in seeing the full low elo and high elo lists in one place, including C and D tiers, then head on over to mobalytics.gg where you can find even more info including counters, builds, tips, combos and more. Everything's just been revamped, so be sure to check it out. See you next time and thanks for watching.